The air down in the belly of the Rattlesnake Gulch mine did not smell like air. It smelled of sulfur, ancient dust, and the sour sweat of men who had forgotten the feeling of the sun. Marin Sinclair swung her pickaxe, the heavy iron head striking the vein of quartz with a bone-jarring thud. The impact traveled up her arms, settling as a dull, throbbing ache in her shoulders. A pain she had carried for 6 months now. It was 1878 in the Arizona Territory, and the world above was baking under a sun hot enough to blister paint. But down here, 500 feet below the crust, it was damp and suffocating. Marin paused, wiping her forehead with the back of a gloved hand. The leather was stained black with ore dust. She adjusted the wick of her oil lamp, the small flame flickering against the encroaching darkness. That lamp was the only thing keeping the shadows at bay, a small, defiant circle of yellow light in a world of absolute black. "Move it, Sinclair," a voice growled from the tunnel behind her. "Rock does not break itself." Marin did not turn around. She knew the voice belonged to Foreman Miller, a man with a soul as hard as the granite they chipped away at. She grit her teeth, her jaws set in a line of determination that had etched deep grooves around her mouth. She was 32 years old, but in this dim light, with layers of dirt masking her features, she looked ageless and sexless, just another body thrown against the earth to bleed it of its silver. She hefted the pickaxe again. 1 more hour. She just had to survive 1 more hour. She worked for the money. It was that simple and that desperate. Her husband, John, was 2 years in the grave, dead from a fever that swept through the territory like a wildfire. He had left her a homestead with a dry well, a mortgage held by the bank, and a younger brother, Toby, whose leg had been crushed by a falling beam in the barn 3 months ago. The mine was the only place paying $2 a day, and Marin was the only woman in Rattlesnake Gulch desperate enough to bind her chest, cut her hair short under a hat, and descend into the dark. When the whistle finally blew, signaling the end of the shift, Marin felt her knees buckle. She dropped the pickaxe into the cart, her fingers locked in a cramp that made them look like claws. She joined the line of men shuffling toward the lift, keeping her head down. She did not speak to them, and they did not speak to her. To them, she was bad luck. A woman in a mine was a curse, a harbinger of collapse. They tolerated her only because Silas Grady, the owner, enjoyed the novelty of paying a woman less to do the same work. The lift ascended, the chains rattling and groaning. When they broke the surface, the late afternoon sun hit Marin like a physical blow. She squinted, her eyes watering against the sudden brilliance. The heat was dry and aggressive, instantly sucking the moisture from her skin. She walked to the pay window, where Silas Grady sat behind a mesh screen, counting coins with greasy fingers. He was a man who looked like he was made of soft dough, sweating in his tailored suit. "Sinclair," he said, not looking up. He slid a few coins across the wooden ledge. Marin counted them. "This is $1.50. Mr. Grady, the wage is $2. Grady looked up then, his eyes small and bead-like. "Docked you for the lamp oil. And you're slower than the men. Be grateful I let you down there at all." Marin felt the anger flare in her chest, hot and sharp, but she swallowed it down. Anger did not buy flour. Anger did not pay the doctor for Toby's medicine. She swept the coins into her pocket, her hand trembling slightly. "Thank you," she said, the words tasting like ash. She turned and began the walk into town. This was the hardest part of the day. Down in the mine, she was just a silhouette. Up here, in the unforgiving light of Rattlesnake Gulch, she was Marin Sinclair, the widow, the unnatural woman who wore trousers and smelled of labor. The town of Rattlesnake Gulch was carved out of the red earth, a collection of wooden buildings with false fronts that looked like they were leaning away from the wind. The main street was a river of red dust, churned up by wagons and horses. As Marin walked, the dust from the mine clung to her clothes, a dark gray stain against the red world. It was her uniform of shame. She passed the general store. 2 women stood on the boardwalk, their dresses clean and crisp, parasols shielding them from the sun. They stopped talking as Marin approached. One of them was Mrs. Gable, The banker's wife. She pulled her skirts back as if Marin were a carrier of plague. Marin kept her chin high, staring straight ahead, but she could feel their eyes on her back. She could hear the whisper that carried on the wind. Disgraceful. Looking like a man. No wonder her husband died. She passed the church, a whitewashed structure that stood like a judgment against the blue sky. Reverend Phelps was standing on the steps, shaking hands with Mayor Luther Kane. The mayor was a tall man with a silver mustache and a chest that puffed out like a pigeon. He liked order. He liked things in their proper boxes. Marin Sinclair was a thing that refused to stay in her box. "Mrs. Sinclair," Mayor Kane called out. His voice was loud, intended to be heard by the gathered citizens. Marin stopped. She had to. To ignore the mayor was to invite trouble she could not afford. "Mayor, I received another complaint today," Kane said, stepping down onto the dirt street, his polished boots contrasting with Marin's worn work boots. "About your attire. It is unsettling the decent women of this town." "I wear what is safe for work, Mayor," Marin said, her voice hoarse from the dust. "The work itself is the issue." Reverend Phelps chimed in, his voice oily and smooth. "It is against the natural order. Marin, a woman belongs in the home. God did not craft your shoulders for the pickaxe. God did not craft my brother's leg to break, either, Reverend," Marin replied quietly. "But bills must be paid. There are other ways for a woman to earn," the mayor said, his eyes flicking over her dirty form with a look that hovered between disgust and something darker. "Decent ways. Or perhaps you should sell that patch of dirt you call a farm and move on. The town would be, cleaner." "My land is not for sale," Marin said. She tightened her grip on the strap of her bag. "Good evening, gentlemen." She walked away before they could say more, her heart hammering against her ribs. She felt small. She felt dirty. Every step was a battle against the urge to run, to hide, to weep. She made for the only place in town that did not judge her, the Rusty Spur Saloon. She did not go in to drink. She couldn't afford it. She went to the back door to pick up the slop bucket for her pigs. Maeve O'Rourke was there, leaning against the doorframe, smoking a thin cheroot. Maeve was a woman of 40, with hair dyed the color of a sunset and eyes that had seen every sin the West had to offer. She owned the Rusty Spur, and she owned herself. "They're giving you hell today, honey," Maeve asked, blowing a stream of smoke into the dry air. "Same as every day," Marin said, lifting the heavy bucket. "That Luther Kane," Maeve spat. "He talks about order, but he cheats at cards. I have seen it." She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a wrapped bundle. "Here, some biscuits left over from lunch. Take them to Toby." "I cannot pay you." "Maeve, did I ask for a coin?" Maeve shoved the bundle into Marin's pocket. "You take it. You are working harder than any two men in this town. And tell that deputy of mine to get back to work if you see him." Marin managed a weak smile. "Thank you." As she rounded the corner of the saloon, she almost ran into Deputy Cole. He was a young man, barely 25, with a badge that looked too heavy for his shirt. He was leaning against the wall, whittling a piece of cedar. He straightened up when he saw her, touching the brim of his hat. "Mrs. Sinclair," he mumbled, looking at his boots. "Deputy." Marin nodded. She knew Cole was decent. He had never mocked her, but he never stood up for her either. He was afraid of Kane. Everyone was afraid of Kane and the money behind him, which belonged to Silas Grady. Marin walked toward the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open scrub and the trail led toward her homestead, near the livery stable. A commotion drew her eye. A group of Apaches had ridden into trade. They were a common enough sight, though usually they kept to the trading post 3 miles east. Today, they were here, in the heart of the beast. There were 5 of them, sitting on painted ponies that looked small but wiry and tough. They had brought deer hides and woven baskets. The townspeople gave them a wide berth, eyeing them with a mixture of fear and hatred. The Indian wars were not so distant in memory, and the peace was fragile, held together by paper treaties and mutual suspicion. In the center of the group sat a man who commanded the space around him without speaking a word. He was broad-shouldered, his hair black and long, bound back with a strip of red cloth. He wore a simple cotton shirt and buckskin leggings, dusty from the ride. His face was like a landscape carved from the canyon rock's sharp angles, deep lines, and eyes that were dark and unreadable. This was Chief Taza, known to the soldiers as Stonehawk. Marin had heard of him. People said he was a man who negotiated rather than raided, a leader who was trying to keep his people alive as the fences closed in. As Marin walked past, burdened by the slop bucket and the weight of her day, a group of young boys ran out from the alley. They were laughing, holding clods of dried mud. "Look," one boy shouted. "The dirt witch meeting the savages." He threw the mud. It missed the Apaches but struck Marin square on the shoulder, exploding into dust that mixed with the mine grit. Marin stumbled, nearly dropping her bucket. The boys howled with laughter. She did not cry out. She simply steadied herself, brushing the dirt from her sleeve with a dignity that cost her every ounce of strength she had left. She looked up and found herself locking eyes with the man on the horse. Chief Taza was looking at her. He did not look at her with the sneer of the mayor, or the lust of the miners, or the pity of Deputy Cole. His gaze was direct, piercing, and terrifyingly calm. He looked at the mud on her shoulder, then at the pickaxe calluses on her hands, and finally at her face. It was a look of recognition. He saw the fatigue. He saw the fight. For a moment, the noise of the town faded the jeering boys, the blacksmith's hammer, the piano from the saloon. There was just the dry wind and the gaze of the Apache chief. He gave a nearly imperceptible nod, not a greeting, but an acknowledgement of a fellow creature surviving in a hostile land. Then he turned his horse away, signaling his men to move on. Marin let out a breath she didn't know she had been holding. She turned and began the long walk home, the image of his dark, steady eyes burning in her mind. Her homestead was 2 miles out. By the time she reached the gate, the sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in violent shades of purple and bruised orange. The house was small, the wood gray and warped. The barn leaned dangerously to the left. Marin, Toby, was sitting on the porch, his crutches resting against his chair. He was 16, thin and pale, his leg bound in splints. He looked at her with large, guilty eyes. He hated that she worked. He hated that he sat. "I am here, Toby," she said, forcing cheer into her voice. She set the bucket down and walked up the steps. "Did you get the money?" he asked. $1.50, she said, omitting the humiliation of the deduction. "It is enough for the flour and the doctor's visit next week." "I heard guns earlier," Toby said, looking toward the hills. "And Eli rode by. He said the mail coach was late." Eli was the town's delivery boy, a kid of 12 who knew everyone's business because he read the postcards when he thought no one was looking. "Probably just hunters," Marin said, though a cold shiver went down her spine. "Come inside. Maeve sent biscuits." Later that night, after Toby was asleep, Marin sat by the small table in the kitchen. She lit the coal oil lamp, not the mine lamp, but the house lamp. The light was softer here. She poured water into a basin and began to scrub. She scrubbed her arms until the skin was raw and red. She scrubbed the coal dust from her neck, from her ears. But no matter how hard she scrubbed, the gray tint seemed to remain in the creases of her skin. Under her fingernails, she looked at her reflection in the dark window. A woman alone, a woman shamed. She touched the pocket where the $1.50 lay. It was not enough. The interest on the loan was due in 2 weeks. Silas Grady knew it. Mayor Kane knew it. They were waiting for her to fail like vultures waiting for a cow to die in the drought. She thought of the boys throwing mud. She thought of the mayor's sneer. And then, unbidden, she thought of the Apache chief, Stonehawk. He had not laughed. Marin blew out the lamp, plunging the room into darkness. Outside, the wind howled across the dry earth, sounding like a chorus of ghosts. She lay down on her narrow cot, her body aching, her heart heavy. Tomorrow, she will go back into the hole. She would swing the axe. She would breathe the dust, because the only thing stronger than her shame was her will to keep this roof over her brother's head. But she did not know that the ground beneath her feet was already shifting. She did not know that in the shadows of the mine, beams were being loosened, and fate was being rewritten. And she did not know that the silent gaze of the Apache chief was the beginning of a storm that would wash Rattlesnake Gulch clean. The morning shift began with a subtle groan in the earth, a sound like the stomach of a great beast rumbling in hunger. Marin Sinclair was 300 feet down in the lateral tunnel known as Shaft 4. The air was thick and tasted of copper. She was working alongside a man named Henderson, a sour-faced miner who swung his pickaxe with a rhythm born of 20 years of misery. "Timber looks rot," Henderson muttered, pausing to spit a stream of tobacco juice into the darkness. "Foreman said new supporters were coming last Tuesday. I do not see any new wood." Marin glanced up. The beams holding up the ceiling were dark with moisture, and one of them was bowing dangerously in the middle. She raised her lamp. There were supposed to be cross braces every 5 feet. Here, there was a gap of nearly 10 feet. "They are stretching the supply," Marin said, her voice low. "Grady is saving pennies on wood while we spend our lives down here." Before Henderson could reply, a young voice echoed from the tunnel entrance. "Message for Foreman Miller. Telegram from Tucson." It was Eli, the town's delivery boy. He was 12 years old, scrawny as a coyote pup, and had no business being this deep underground. But Eli did anything for a nickel, even running messages into the pit of hell. "Get out of here! Eli!" Marin shouted, a sudden instinct seizing her chest. The groan in the earth had changed pitch. It was no longer a rumble, it was a shriek. "I just need to find," Eli started, stepping closer. The sound that followed was not an explosion, but a crack so loud it felt like it split Marin's skull. The bowing beam above Henderson simply disintegrated. The ceiling did not fall in chunks, it poured. Tons of rock and dirt, held back for 1,000,000 years, reclaimed the space. Henderson disappeared instantly. There was no scream, just the sickening crunch of rock meeting bone. The shockwave knocked Marin backward. Her lamp flew from her hand and shattered, extinguishing the light. Darkness was total and immediate. Dust filled her mouth, choking her. "Marin!" Eli screamed from somewhere in the blackness. "Stay down!" Marin coughed, pulling her shirt up over her nose. She crawled forward on her hands and knees, feeling the vibrations of the collapse still shuddering through the floor. The air was changing. It was getting hotter. And there was a new smell, sharp and sweet. Blasting gas. If they didn't move, they would be dead in 2 minutes. She felt a small boot. "Eli, I am stuck," the boy sobbed. "My foot is caught." Marin found him in the dark. A slab of shale had pinned his ankle. She could hear the hiss of escaping gas from a fissure the collapse had opened. She braced her back against the tunnel wall and shoved her hands under the slab. She gritted her teeth, every muscle in her body straining. She thought of the insults in town, the look on Mayor Kane's face, the hunger in Toby's eyes. She channeled all that rage into her arms. With a guttural roar, she heaved. The rock shifted just an inch. "Pull, Eli!" The boy scrambled backward, weeping. He was free. "Grab my belt," Marin ordered. "Do not let go. We are walking out." She could not see, but she knew mine. She counted her steps. 10 steps to the junction, turn left, 20 steps to the main shaft. The dust was so thick it felt like swimming in mud. Behind them, the tunnel groaned again, and another section collapsed, sealing the tomb of Henderson and the missing timber. They spilled out into the main shaft where the cage lift waited. 2 other miners were there, paralyzed by panic. "Ring the bell!" Marin screamed, shoving Eli into the cage. She grabbed the terrified men and threw them in after him. She slammed the gate and yanked the signal cord 3 times. The cage jerked upward just as the gas reached the shaft. When they burst into the daylight, Marin fell onto the wooden platform, gasping for air that actually contained oxygen. She was covered in gray dust, blood running from a gash on her forehead where a rock had grazed her. Eli was clinging to her leg, shaking violently. The alarm whistle was blowing. Men were running. Silas Grady came storming out of his office, his face purple. Mayor Kane was with him. They had been reviewing the monthly ledgers. "What happened?" Grady demanded, staring at the dust billowing from the shaft. "Shaft 4 is gone," Marin gasped. Standing up, her legs trembled, but she locked her knees. "Henderson is dead." The timber gave way. There were no cross braces. "Grady, you skipped bracing." The gathering crowd of miners fell silent. This was the accusation they all knew was true, but feared to speak. Grady's eyes darted to Mayor Kane, then to the crowd. He saw the anger rising in the men's faces. He needed to deflect it, and he needed to do it fast. He looked at Marin, bloodied, dirty, a woman in men's trousers standing on his platform. "You lie," Grady spat. "The timber was sound. It was you." Marin blinked, wiping blood from her eye. "Me. I warned you. Miller," Grady shouted at the foreman, who had just run up. "I told you a woman in the mine brings doom." "The earth rejects her," she cursed the vein. It was a ridiculous, archaic superstition, but fear makes men stupid. The miners were terrified. They had just felt the ground shake. They needed a reason that wasn't "the owner is cheap." Because if the owner was cheap, they were all next. If it was a curse, they could fix it by removing the curse. "She was down there with a hex," Mayor Kane added, his voice booming with authority. "I saw her whispering to the rocks myself just yesterday. I was working." Marin stepped forward, fury overriding her exhaustion. "I saved this boy. Look at the boy the supports were missing. She lured the boy down there." Reverend Phelps appeared from the crowd like a vulture sensing carrion. "A sacrifice to her dark intent." Eli tried to speak, but he was coughing up dust, his small chest heaving. "Caesar!" Kane ordered. Two large camp guards grabbed Marin by the arms. She struggled, kicking one in the shin, but they were too strong. They dragged her off the platform and threw her into the dirt of the main street. "Bring her to the town hall steps," Kane commanded. "We will settle this now. Rattlesnake Gulch will not tolerate a hazard to its industry." The procession was a nightmare. Marin was hauled through the street, the guards gripping her so tight her arms went numb. The townspeople poured out of shops and saloons. The story spread like wildfire. Twisting as it went, Marin collapsed the mine. Marin killed Henderson. Marin was a witch. They threw her down at the base of the steps leading to the white-shingled town hall. Marin landed hard on her side. She pushed herself up, spitting blood and grit. She refused to stay on the ground. She stood, swaying slightly, surrounded by a semicircle of 300 people. Mayor Kane stood on the top step, Silas Grady to his right, Reverend Phelps to his left, an unholy trinity of power, money, and religion. "Marin Sinclair," Kane announced, hooking his thumbs in his vest. "You are a stain on this community. You dress like a man. You reject your station. And now, your unnatural presence has cost a good man his life." "Murderer," a woman shouted from the back. "She is bad luck," a miner yelled. Marin looked at them. She saw Mrs. Gable clutching her pearls. She saw the blacksmith looking away. She saw Deputy Cole standing at the edge of the crowd, his hand on his gun belt, looking pale and conflicted, but doing nothing. "I am not the bad luck," Marin said. Her voice was raspy, but it carried, "The bad luck is that man's greed." She pointed a shaking finger at Silas Grady. "Check the supply logs. Check the timber orders. He stopped buying heartwood 3 months ago. He's using sapwood and skipping braces. I am not a witch. I am a witness." "Silence," Kane roared. "You have no voice here. You are stripped of your employment. You are stripped of your standing. You will go back to your shack, put on a dress, and pray for forgiveness. If I see you near the mine again, I will have you whipped for trespassing." "You want me to starve?" Marin said, her eyes burning. "You want my land. Your land is forfeit if you cannot pay your debts." Grady sneered. "And without a job? You cannot pay." The crowd jeered. Someone threw a rotten tomato. It splattered against Marin's chest, a bright red stain on the gray dust. Then a stone flew, striking her shoulder. Marin did not flinch. She did not cry. She stood there, a lone figure against a wall of hatred, holding onto her dignity with bleeding fingernails. "I work to live," she shouted, her voice breaking with raw emotion. "I feed my brother. You take the lives of minors and turn it into a show. You are the monsters, not me." The crowd surged forward, ugly and threatening. And then the sound of hooves cut through the noise. It was not one horse, but 20. The crowd ripple-effected into silence. Turning toward the street, the Apache trading party had returned. They had been loading supplies at the edge of town, but the commotion had drawn them in. They rode in a column, silent and imposing. The townspeople scrambled back, pressing against the buildings, fear replacing their bravado. The Apaches formed a line between the mob and the town hall steps, effectively cutting Marin off from her tormentors. In the center was Chief Taza. He sat on a large paint horse, looking down at the scene. He looked at the screaming mare. He looked at the sweating Silas Grady. And then he looked at Marin. She was standing alone in the clearing, dirt on her face, tomato pulp on her shirt, blood on her forehead. She was trembling, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of a cornered animal refusing to die. She met Taza's gaze. She did not look away. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Taza dismounted. His movement was fluid, like water flowing over rock. He handed his reins to a warrior beside him. He walked into the open space, the dust crunching under his moccasins. He stopped 6 feet from Marin. He looked at her hands, scarred and calloused. He looked at the pickaxe bruise on her shoulder. He looked at the fire in her eyes that the town tried to drown with spit and stones. Mayor Kane found his voice. "This is a town matter. Chief, take your savages and go. This woman is being disciplined." Taza ignored him completely. He did not even turn his head. He spoke to Marin, his voice deep and resonant, carrying to every corner of the square. "They say you are weak," Taza said. His English was accented but precise. "They say you are bad luck." Marin held his gaze. "They lie." Taza nodded slowly. He turned to the crowd, his face impassive. He pointed a hand at Marin. "I see a warrior." Taza said, "I see one who walks into the dark when the men run away." "I watched you carry the boy." A murmur went through the crowd. They did not know the Apaches had been watching the mine entrance from the ridge. Taza turned back to Marin. He looked at her not as a piece of property, and not as a charity case. He looked at her as if he had found a diamond in a pile of coal. "That is the woman I want," Taza said. The words hung in the air. Someone in the back of the crowd giggled nervously. Then a laugh rippled through the mob. It was a cruel, relieving sound. Of course, the savage wanted the outcast. It was a joke. "Take her," Silas Grady laughed, wiping sweat from his neck. "By all means, Chief, she is fit for a wigwam. Take the witch and go." Mayor Kane smirked. A fitting end. Trash to trash. But the laughter died when Taza did not smile. He did not move to grab Marin. He did not produce a rope. He stood with his hands at his sides, respectful. "I do not buy her," Taza said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerous. "And I do not take her. I offer—" He looked at Marin. "I need a person who understands this stone. I need a person who does not lie. Come with us. You will be an ally. You will be safe from these coyotes." Mayor Kane's smile vanished. This was not a savage claiming a squaw. This was a political alliance. This was the chief of the local Apache band elevating the town pariah to a position of respect. It was a direct insult to Kane's authority. "She goes nowhere," Kane shouted, stepping down the stairs. "She is under arrest, Deputy Cole. Arrest that woman for inciting a riot and negligence leading to death." Deputy Cole stepped forward, looking sick. "Marin, I have to—" Marin looked at the jailhouse down the street. If she went into that cell, she would never come out. Grady would pay someone to strangle her in the night, or she would rot there while Toby starved. She looked at Taza. His face was calm, offering a choice, not a command. Behind him, the open desert waited. It was hard, it was dangerous, but it was free. If I go with you, Marin whispered, I cannot go home. Home is where you are not hunted. Taza replied softly, My brother. We will watch the house, Taza promised. But you must move now. Cole was 5 steps away, reaching for his handcuffs. Marin made her choice. She did not step back. She stepped toward the Apache. I'm going, Marin said loudly. Stop her, Kane shrieked. Shoot if you have to. The Apache warriors instantly raised their rifles. The click of 20 hammers cocking back was louder than the mayor's shout. The crowd screamed and scattered, diving for cover behind wagons and barrels. Deputy Cole froze, his hands in the air. Taza offered Marin a hand. It was a large hand, rough and warm. She took it. He did not pull her. He steadied her as she swung up behind him on his horse. This is kidnapping, Reverend Phelps yelled from behind a pillar. She chose, Taza said simply. He mounted the horse in one fluid motion. Marin wrapped her arms around his waist, the smell of sage, leather, and wood smoke filling her nose, replacing the stench of the mine gas. She felt the hard muscle of his back against her chest. Ride, Taza commanded his men. The party turned and galloped out of Rattlesnake Gulch, kicking up a cloud of red dust that choked Mayor Kane and coated the pristine suit of Silas Grady. They rode hard. Marin did not look back at the town that had tried to break her. She looked forward, toward the violet mountains and the setting sun, but her mind was racing. She was not running away to hide. She was running away to plan. She knew where the missing timber was. She knew which ledger Grady had hidden. And now, she has an army. As the wind whipped her hair, she tightened her grip on the Apache chief. He had claimed her in front of them all. That is the woman I want. The words echoed in her mind, terrifying and thrilling in equal measure. She was an outlaw now. She was a traitor to her race in the eyes of the law. But for the first time in 2 years, as the lights of Rattlesnake Gulch faded into the twilight behind them, Marin Sinclair did not feel alone. She felt the steady rhythm of the horse, the solid presence of the man before her, and the cold, hard resolve settling in her gut like iron. She would come back, and when she did, she would bring the mountain down on Silas Grady's head. The hooves of 20 horses thundered against the hardpan, a rhythm that vibrated up through Marin Sinclair's spine and settled in her teeth. She held tight to the waist of Chief Taza, her face pressed against the rough cotton of his shirt to shield her eyes from the stinging grit. They had been riding for 2 hours, putting miles of scrub brush and dry wash between themselves and the lynch mob of Rattlesnake Gulch. They slowed near the Devil's Backbone, a ridge of jagged rock that marked the edge of the town's immediate influence. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky a bruised purple that faded into the black of approaching night. As the party navigated a narrow pass, a shadow detached itself from the gloom of a mesquite thicket. The Apache warriors instantly raised their rifles, the click of hammers echoing off the canyon walls. "Hold!" Marin shouted, her voice raspy. She recognized the silhouette of the buckboard wagon and the woman sitting atop it, a shotgun resting casually across her lap. It was Maeve O'Rourke. Taza raised a hand, signaling his men to lower their weapons. Though they kept their eyes sharp, he guided his horse toward the wagon. Maeve looked at Marin, her eyes narrowing as she took in the dust and the blood on Marin's forehead. "I figured you would head for the gap," Maeve said, her voice dry. "It is the only way out that does not lead straight to the army fort." Marin slid down from the horse, her legs trembling as they hit the ground. "You should not be here. Maeve, if Kane knows you helped me." "Kane is busy trying to convince the town he is still in charge," Maeve spat, turning her head to spit tobacco juice into the dust. "He has got a lot of shouting to do before he notices I am gone." Maeve reached under the seat of the buckboard and pulled out a heavy canvas sack and a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. She tossed them to Marin. "Dried beef, beans, and every dollar I could scrape out of the safe," Maeve said. "And this?" Marin unwrapped the oilcloth. Inside lay a snub-nosed .32 caliber revolver and a box of ammunition. It was small, easily hidden, but deadly at close range. "I have never shot a man." "Maeve," Marin said quietly, feeling the cold weight of the steel. "There is a first time for everything in this territory," Maeve replied grimly. "Especially with Silas Grady behind you. He will not let this go. Marin, you shamed him. A man like that would burn the world to hide his embarrassment." Marin looked at the gun, then tucked it into the waistband of her trousers. "I am not running away. Maeve, I'm going to find the proof. The timber logs." "You stay alive," Maeve said, gathering her reins. "That is the job right now. Just stay alive." She looked up at Taza, her expression unreadable. "You watch her back. Stonehawk, she is worth 10 of those men back there." Taza inclined his head, a gesture of solemn respect. "She is with us." Maeve turned the wagon and disappeared back into the darkness toward the town. Marin stood for a moment, watching the dust settle, feeling the severance from her old life. She was truly an outcast now. "We move," Taza said. "The moon is rising." We rode to the high country. The journey over the next 3 days was a brutal education in survival. The Arizona territory was not merely hot. It was a furnace designed to test the will of any living thing that dared to cross it. The wind did not just blow, it scoured. It carried a fine alkali dust that coated the inside of the nose and throat, making every breath a labor. Marin learned quickly. She watched the Apache warriors. She saw how they did not fight the land but moved with it. They did not gulp water. They sipped it, holding it in their mouths to moisten the tongue before swallowing. They did not ride in the heat of the day if they could avoid it. They rested in the shade of overhangs and moved when the sun lost its bite. She wrapped her scarf around her face, leaving only her eyes exposed, imitating the way the warriors shielded themselves. She learned to breathe shallowly, filtering the air through the cloth. She did not complain when her legs chafed raw against the saddle. She clamped her jaw shut. When her stomach cramped from the dried meat, she drank water and kept moving. She could feel the eyes of the other warriors on her. They were not friendly. To them, she was a white-eye, a representative of the people who had stolen their hunting grounds and fenced off the water. Some, like a young warrior named Nantan, watched her with open hostility, his hand often drifting near his knife when she was close. But Taza kept them in check with a look or a sharp word in their tongue. He rode near her, not as a guard, but as a silent presence. On the 4th night, they made camp in a box canyon. Sheltered from the wind, a small fire was permitted, built from dry greasewood that burned hot and smokeless. Marin sat by the fire, cleaning the glass of her mine lamp. She had kept it clipped to her belt since the collapse. It was useless out here without oil, but she polished the brass housing with a rag, her fingers tracing the dents and scratches. Taza sat across from her, sharpening a skinning knife. The firelight danced across the planes of his face, highlighting the deep lines etched by sun and worry. "You keep the tool of the dark," Taza observed, his voice low. Marin looked up. "That is all I have. It is how I see." "In the world above, the sun is the lamp," Taza said. "Why do you cling to the machine?" "Because the sun goes down," Marin replied. "And when it does, you need your own light." Taza stopped sharpening the knife. He looked at her, studying her face. "You are not like the other women of your town. They fear the silence. You sit in it." "I am used to silence," Marin said. "The mine is quiet before the blast." "Do you fear blood?" Taza asked suddenly. The question was sharp. A test. Marin paused. She thought of Henderson's crushed body. She thought of Toby's leg. "I fear useless blood. I fear blood will be spilled for no reason." "Do you fear being alone?" Marin looked into the fire. The flames twisted and curled. "No," she said, her voice steady. "I fear being discarded. I fear being used up like a dull pickaxe and thrown on the slag heap. That is what they tried to do to me. That is what they do to the timber, and the mules, and the men." Taza nodded slowly. He reached into a pouch at his waist and pulled out a small stone. He tossed it to her. Marin caught it. It was a piece of raw turquoise, the color of the sky after a rain, veined with black matrix. "The stone does not change," Taza said. "Wind hits it, water hits it. It remains. Keep it. It is a sign to my people that you are under my protection. It will keep Nantan's knife in its sheath. I do not need gifts. Taza, Marin said, though she closed her fingers around the cool stone. It is not a gift, Taza corrected. It is a mark. You are part of the agreement now. We share the danger. The danger was closer than they knew. 2 days later, they were navigating a labyrinth of slot canyons, the red walls rising 300 feet on either side. The sky was a narrow ribbon of blue high above. It was a perfect place for an ambush, and Silas Grady's money had bought men who knew the terrain. The first shot cracked against the canyon wall, sending a spray of rock shards raining down on the party. "Cover!" Taza roared, his voice echoing like thunder. Marin threw herself from her horse, scrambling behind a fallen boulder. The canyon erupted in gunfire. Bullets whined off the rocks, kicking up spurts of red dust. The Apaches returned fire instantly, their rifles barking in a disciplined rhythm. Marin pressed her back against the stone, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She drew the small revolver Maeve had given her, but her hands were shaking. She looked out. The attackers were positioned high on the rim, firing down. It was a killing box. She saw Nantan, the young warrior who hated her, pinned down behind a dead scrub oak. He was firing a Winchester repeater, but he was fumbling with the reload. A bullet struck the ground inches from his face, blinding him with dust. Then she saw Chayton, an older warrior. Take a round to the thigh. He crumpled in the open, exposed to the shooters on the rim, without thinking. Marin holstered her gun. It was useless at this range. She needed to move. "Stay down!" Taza shouted from his position. Marin ignored him. She sprinted from her cover, bending low, diving through the dust. She reached Chayton just as another bullet struck the ground where his head had been. "Get up!" she screamed, grabbing him by the back of his vest. The man was heavy, dead weight with shock. Marin gritted her teeth. Summoning the strength that had swung a pickaxe for 6 months, she dragged him, her boots skidding on the loose gravel. Bullets danced around her feet. She did not look up. She focused on the rock shelter 5 yards away. She heaved him behind the cover just as a round smashed into the spot she had been standing. Chayton groaned, clutching his leg. Blood was pooling dark and fast. Marin tore the scarf from her face and pressed it into the wound. "Hold this," she ordered. She looked at Nantan, who was still pinned down. He was out of ammunition, his rifle empty. Marin saw his ammo belt lying in the dirt 3 feet away. She reached out, snatched the belt, and threw it to him. "Load!" she yelled. Nantan looked at her, his eyes wide with shock. He grabbed the belt and loaded his weapon. He fired, forcing the unseen gunman on the rim to duck. The skirmish lasted another 10 minutes. The Apaches, masters of this terrain, began to flank the rim, climbing the vertical fissures like spiders. The hired guns, realizing they were losing the advantage, broke off the attack and retreated. Silence returned to the canyon, heavy and ringing. Marin sat with her back against the rock, her hands covered in Chayton's blood. She was trembling now that the adrenaline was fading. Taza walked over to her. He looked at the blood on her hands. He looked at Chayton, who was alive because of her. Then he looked at Nantan. Nantan lowered his rifle. He walked over to Marin. He did not smile. He did not apologize. But he touched his forehead with 2 fingers and nodded to her. It was an acknowledgement. She was not baggage. She was blood. "They are not just trying to drive you away," Taza said, kneeling beside her to inspect Chayton's wound. "They are trying to kill you. Men do not hire long-range rifles for a warning." "They know I saw the ledger," Marin said, wiping her hands on her trousers. "Grady knows I can prove the fraud." "Then we must be harder to kill," Taza said. They moved on, but the pace was different now. The warriors rode in a tighter formation around Marin. She was no longer just the chief's strange project. She was a combatant. That evening, they camped near a creek that fed into the river running down toward Rattlesnake Gulch. The mood was somber. Chayton was feverish, and the reality of their situation was settling in. They were being hunted by professionals. Marin walked down to the water's edge to fill the canteens. The moon was full, reflecting off the surface of the stream. She knelt on the muddy bank. She dipped her cupped hand into the water and brought it to her lips. She spat it out immediately. It was vile. It did not taste like mud or algae. It tasted sharp, bitter, and overwhelmingly metallic. It tasted like a mouthful of copper pennies and rotten eggs. She frowned, dipping her hand again. She rubbed the water between her fingers. It felt slightly slick, oily. She looked upstream. The creek wound its way out of the mountains. From the direction of the new diggings, Silas Grady had opened 3 months ago the east vein that he had forbidden anyone to enter. "Taza!" Marin called out, her voice urgent. The chief appeared at her side silently, his rifle in hand. "What is it?" "Taste the water," Marin said. Taza knelt and touched the water to his tongue. He grimaced and spat. "It is poison. Spirit sickness water." "No," Marin said, her mind racing, connecting the dots of her mining knowledge. "It is not spirits. It is chemical. Mercury, cyanide. They are using leaching agents to separate the silver from the poor quality ore." She stood up, staring at the dark current. "This water flows down to the reservation lands. Does it not to the maize fields?" "Yes," Taza said, his face hardening into stone. "And to the town wells." Marin felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. Grady is not just cutting costs on timber. He is processing ore illegally, using cheap chemicals and dumping the slag right into the watershed. He is poisoning the land to get the silver out faster. "He kills the earth to feed his pocket," Taza said. The anger in his voice was a low rumble, like an earthquake deep underground. "If the town knew," Marin started. "The town drinks what he gives them," Taza said. "But my people are dying. The sickness in the belly. The calves are born with 2 heads. We thought it was a curse." "It is a crime," Marin said. She looked at Taza. "We have to go back. I need the ledger to prove the timber fraud. But this is bigger. We need a sample of this water, and we need to find where he is dumping it." Taza looked at her. The moonlight caught the turquoise stone hanging from her neck. "To go back is to walk into the fire," Taza said. "Then we walk," Marin said, clutching the unlit mine lamp at her belt. "Because if we do not, there will be no one left to drink the water." Taza placed a hand on her shoulder. It was a heavy, grounding weight. "We walk," he agreed. In the distance, a coyote howled, a lonely, mournful sound. But down by the poisoned creek, the alliance between the outcast widow and the Apache chief had hardened into something unbreakable. They were no longer just running for survival. They were marching for war. The high camp of the Apache lay nestled in a granite bowl of the Dragoon Mountains, a place where the air was thin and smelled of pine resin and crushed juniper. It was a world away from the suffocating dark of the mine. Yet, Marin Sinclair found herself watching the ground just as intently. Here, however, she was not looking for veins of silver, but for a place to stand where she did not feel like an intruder. 3 days had passed since the ambush at the canyon. The wound on her forehead had scabbed over, but the bruises on her soul remained tender. She moved through the camp with the stiffness of a stranger, conscious of the eyes that followed her. Children stopped their games to stare. Women grinding corn paused, their rhythmic motion suspended as the white woman in men's trousers walked by. She found herself sitting near the edge of the camp, mending a tear in her shirt, when a shadow fell across her lap. Marin looked up to see an elderly woman standing there. Her face was a map of deep creases, her eyes obscured by cataracts that turned her pupils a milky blue. Yet she seemed to look right through Marin's skin. This was Etza. The people called her the listener. She was the healer, the medicine woman who held the history of the band in her withered hands. Marin started to rise, but Etza waved a hand, a sharp, commanding gesture. The old woman sat down on the dirt beside her, moving with a surprising fluidity for her age. She reached out and took Marin's hand. Marin flinched. Her hands were rough, stained permanently with ore dust. The nails broken, the palms calloused from the pickaxe handle. They were not the hands of a lady. They were the hands of a mule. Etza ran a thumb over the calluses. She did not speak English, but a younger woman, who had followed her silently, translated. "She says you carry the mountain on your skin," the translator said softly. "I work the mine," Marin replied, feeling a sudden, burning shame. "It is dirt, just dirt." Etza shook her head. She opened a small leather pouch and dipped her fingers into a salve that smelled of sage and animal fat. She began to rub the ointment into Marin's knuckles. "She says it is not dirt," the translator continued. "It is earth. The earth knows you. She says she sees a quiet badger in you. You dig, you stay low, but you have teeth." Marin looked at the old woman. For months, the town of Rattlesnake Gulch had looked at these hands with disgust. Silas Grady had looked at them with mockery. But this woman, who had every reason to hate a white trespasser, was touching them with reverence. "Tell her," Marin's voice wavered. "Tell her I'm just trying to survive." Etza squeezed Marin's hand tightly, then released it. She spoke a few rapid words to the translator. "She says survival is not a sin. It is my first duty. But do not let the stone enter your heart. You are flesh. Remember, you are flesh." Etza rose and walked away, leaving Marin staring at her own hands, glistening with the salve. For the first time, she did not try to wipe them on her trousers. She sat there, the smell of sage filling her nose, and felt a wall inside her chest begin to crumble. That evening, Taza came for her. "Walk with me," he said. It was not a request. He led her away from the fires, up a narrow goat trail that climbed the ridge overlooking the valley to the south. The moon was waning, a sliver of bone in the black sky. They climbed in silence, the only sound the crunch of loose shale under their boots. When they reached the summit, the wind hit them, cold and biting. Taza stood at the edge of the precipice, looking down into the darkness of the valley floor miles away. "Look," Taza said, pointing south. Marin squinted. In the distance, she could see the faint, glowing lights of Rattlesnake Gulch. But Taza was not pointing at the town. He was pointing to a dark scar that cut across the moonlit landscape, closer to the foothills. "That is the Spirit Wash," Taza said. "It runs from the high peaks to the river. For generations, my people have gone there to pray. It is where the water sings." "I know it," Marin said. "It is dry this time of year." "It should be dry," Taza corrected. "Look closer." Marin focused. There was a glimmer in the wash, a sludge-like reflection. "Water?" she asked. "Not water," Taza said, his voice hard. "Mud. Poison mud." He turned to her, his face grim. "Silas Grady has dug a new tunnel. He calls it the East Vein, but he is not following the silver. He is tunneling under the mountain to drain his chemical tanks. He is pumping the wash full of the sickness you tasted in the creek. He is using the earth to hide his poison." Marin felt a cold knot in her stomach. "He is dumping cyanide tailings directly into the aquifer. If that reaches the main river, everything dies. The deer, the maize, the children, and the town. He kills the earth to feed his pocket," Taza said. The anger in his voice was a low rumble, like an earthquake deep underground. Marin looked at the dark stain on the valley floor. It was a death sentence written in sludge. She looked up at Taza, and for a moment, the distance between them vanished. They were just two people standing on the edge of a dying world. "Why did you bring me here, Taza?" she asked, her voice quiet against the wind. Taza turned his back to the wind, facing her. "Because you know the rock. You know where the tunnels breathe." Marin felt a pang of disappointment, sharp and sudden. "Is that all I am, a map, a key to a door you cannot open?" The question hung between them. It was the fear that had been gnawing at her since he pulled her onto his horse. Was she just a tool? A political statement to anger the mayor. Taza stepped closer. He was close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his chest. He looked down at her, his dark eyes searching hers. "I could find a map," Taza said softly. "I could force a foreman to talk. I did not bring you because you know mine. Marin." He used her name. It sounded different on his tongue. heavier, more significant. "I brought you because you are the only one who sees the poison and calls it poison," he said. "The others see profit. You see the truth. I need the truth beside me." Marin's breath caught in her throat. He was not asking for a minor. He was asking for a partner. Before she could answer, a commotion erupted from the camp below. Shouts echoed up the canyon walls. Taza spun around, his hand instantly going to the knife at his belt. "Stay here," he ordered, but Marin was already moving. "No," she said. They scrambled down the trail, rocks sliding under their feet. When they reached the camp perimeter, they found a circle of warriors gathered around a small, crumpled figure on the ground. Marin pushed through the line of men. "Let me through." Lying in the dirt, gasping for air, was a boy. He was covered in scratches, his clothes torn by thorns, his face a mask of dust and sweat. "Eli," Marin dropped to her knees. The 12-year-old delivery boy looked up, his eyes wide and terrified. He coughed, spitting up dry bile. "Marin, I found you." "How did you get here?" Marin asked, grabbing his shoulders. "Did you walk?" "Followed the tracks," Eli wheezed. "It took me 2 days. Hide from the patrols." "Patrols?" Taza asked, stepping into the circle. Eli nodded frantically. He reached into his boot and pulled out a folded, crumpled piece of paper. It was stained with sweat. "Deputy Cole," Eli gasped. "He left this in the livery stable, under the loose board where I hide my comics. He knew I would find it." Marin took the paper. She unfolded it carefully near the firelight. It was a page torn from a ledger. The header read, "Grady Mining Company. Supply Manifest. March 1878. Marin scanned the columns. Her finger traced the lines. "Here," she whispered. "Look." She pointed to a series of entries. "Timber. Grade C pine, sapwood. Quantity 500 feet. Destination shaft 4. Next to it, in a different handwriting, Silas Grady's unmistakable scrawl, were the words, "Log as Grade A oak. Billing to investors full price." It was the smoking gun. It was proof of fraud, embezzlement, and negligence leading to death. "He marked it," Eli said. "Cole marked the real numbers." Marin looked at Taza. "This proves the collapse was not an accident. It proves murder." "And the poison?" Taza asked. "The poison is why he needs the extra money." Marin realized, the pieces clicking together. Proper disposal costs thousands. Dumping it is free. He is stealing from the investors on timber to pay for the secret tunnel, and saving on disposal to pocket the difference. He is burning the candle at both ends, and we are the wax. Eli sat up, drinking greedily from a canteen a woman offered him. "There is more. Marin, the telegraph." Marin froze. "What about it?" "Mr. Grady sent a wire to Tucson," Eli said, wiping his mouth. "I heard the operator talking. He was hired by the Pinkerton agency, and he sent for regulators. Gunmen. They are coming on the train tomorrow." "Regulators," Taza said, the word tasting bitter. "Mercenaries." "They are not coming to arrest me," Marin said, clutching the paper. "They are coming to erase me. And us," Taza added. "If they have trackers, they will find this camp in 2 days." The silence that followed was heavy. The safety of the mountains was an illusion. The modern world, with its telegraphs, trains, and hired killers, was coming for them. "We cannot stay here," Marin said. She stood up, the paper clenched in her fist. "We have to go back. We have to finish this before the train arrives." "To go back is suicide," a warrior named Nantan said from the shadows. "Staying here is death," Taza countered. "If the regulators come, they bring cannons. They bring an army." He looked at Marin. "What is the plan?" Marin's mind raced. She thought of the mine, the town, the people. "We need to force them into the light. We have the ledger. We have Eli. Now we need the water sample. We go to town, not to fight, but to testify. Kane owns the judge." Nantan spat. "He does not own the people," Marin said. "Not all of them. If we show them the truth, the real truth, right in front of their faces, Kane cannot hide, but we have to be fast." They moved out an hour later. Taza took only 4 men, Marin and Eli. They left the rest to guard the women and children and prepare to move the camp higher if needed. They rode hard through the night, descending from the high granite into the labyrinth of slot canyons that led toward the town. By dawn, they were 5 miles from Rattlesnake Gulch. The terrain here was treacherous, a maze of red rock fissures and narrow ravines. "Hold," Taza signaled. He slid off his horse, his ear turned to the wind. "Riders, close." Marin listened. She heard it too, the faint jingle of a bridle, the strike of a horseshoe on stone. It was not the rhythmic trot of a traveler. It was the slow, searching pace of a patrol. "They are sweeping the canyon," Taza whispered. "We cannot cross the open ground." He pointed to a narrow fissure in the canyon wall, a vertical crack barely wide enough for a man. "In there, the horses will go with Nantan to the lower draw. We hide until they pass." Marin grabbed Eli. "Go with Nantan. Stay quiet." Eli nodded and scrambled away. Marin and Taza slipped into the fissure. It was tight, a claustrophobic slice of darkness in the red rock. They had to stand sideways, pressed chest to chest, to fit. Outside, the sounds of the patrol grew louder. Voices drifted on the wind. "Check the north ridge," a voice echoed. "Grady says $500 for the woman," another answered. Marin stopped breathing. $500. That was more than she could earn in 10 years. Every man with a gun would be looking for her. She was pressed hard against Taza. She could feel the steady thrum of his heart against her own racing pulse. The stone was cold against her back, but his body was a wall of heat. His scent, wood smoke, leather, and something uniquely him filled the small space. She looked up. His face was inches from hers. He was looking at the opening of the fissure, his hand on his knife, his body tense as a coiled spring. The riders passed slowly. One horse snorted right outside their hiding spot. Marin flinched. Taza shifted slightly, bringing his arm up to shield her, effectively caging her against the rock. It was a protective gesture, but in the tight space, it was intensely intimate. They waited. 5 minutes, 10 minutes. The sound of hooves faded, but they did not move. To move too soon was to die. The tension in the crevice shifted. The danger of the patrol receded, replaced by a different kind of danger. Marin became acutely aware of the line of his hip against hers, of his breath stirring the hair on her forehead. She looked up at him. Taza was looking down at her. The adrenaline of the hunt had dilated his pupils, making his eyes black pools. "They are gone," Marin whispered, but she made no move to leave the shelter of his body. "They are circling," Taza murmured. "We must wait." His gaze dropped to her mouth, then back to her eyes. The question was there, unspoken. He was a man of honor. He had claimed he wanted her, but he had never touched her without permission. "Marin," he said, his voice a low rumble in his chest that vibrated against hers. "This path, it ends in blood or fire. Do you want me to stop?" He wasn't just asking about the physical closeness. He was asking about the alliance, the protection, the dangerous entanglement of their lives. He was giving her an out. Marin looked at him. She thought of John, her late husband. A good man, a safe man. Taza was not safe. He was a storm. But standing here, pressed against him in the dark, she realized she did not want safety. She wanted to be seen, and he saw her. She did not speak. Words were too small for this. Slowly, deliberately, she reached out. She placed her hand flat against the center of his chest, over his heart. She felt the heavy, powerful beat of it beneath her palm. She did not push him away. She let her hand rest there, her fingers curling slightly into his shirt. It was an answer louder than a shout. Taza exhaled, a long, ragged sound. He leaned his forehead against hers, his eyes closing for a brief second. His hand, which had been bracing the wall near her head, moved down to cover her hand on his chest, his fingers interlaced with hers, rough skin against rough skin. For a moment, in the silence of the rock, there was no mine, no mayor, no poison, just two people breathing the same air. "Then we go forward," Taza whispered. He pulled back, breaking the spell, though the electricity remained. Nantan waits. They slipped out of the fissure, the morning sun blinding after the shadows. Marin felt flushed, her skin tingling where they had touched. They reunited with the horses and Eli in the lower draw. The group moved with urgency now, skirting the main trails. By midday, they reached the banks of the river, 2 miles upstream from the town. This was where they had to cross to reach the back entrance of the mine. Marin dismounted and walked to the water's edge. The river here was still clear, not yet fouled by the tributary from the east vein. She knelt and plunged her hands into the cold water. She scrubbed them vigorously. The gray ore dust, the layers of grime from the journey, the blood from Chaitan's wound. It all swirled away in the current, clouding the water for a second before vanishing downstream. She looked at her hands. They were raw, scarred, and red, but they were clean. "You wash away the mine?" Taza asked, standing behind her. "No," Marin said, standing up and shaking the water from her fingers. "I am washing away the shame. They called me dirty. They called me a stain. I am done being what they call me." She turned to face him. "I am ready." Eli came running up from the lookout point, his face pale. "Marin, Taza," the boy hissed. "I heard the riders talking again, down by the ford." "What did they say?" Marin asked, drying her hands on her trousers. "They said Cain is gathering everyone in the square at noon," Eli said, his voice trembling. "They are calling it Town Discipline Day. They are going to hang a sign on the mine gate." "What sign?" Taza asked. Eli swallowed hard. "A wanted poster, with Marin's name. And they are going to burn your homestead, Marin, at sunset, to show what happens to traitors." Marin felt the blood drain from her face. Toby. The house was empty, but it was all she had left of her past. It was the only thing she owned. "They want to burn it down," Marin whispered. "They want to draw you out." Taza said, "It is a trap. It is a stage," Marin said, her eyes hardening. "Cain wants a show. He wants to make an example." She checked the load in her revolver. She checked the kerosene level in her mine lamp. "Let us give him a show he will never forget," she said. Taza signaled his men. They mounted up. The time for hiding in crevices was over. They turned their horses toward Rattlesnake Gulch, riding not as fugitives, but as a storm front rolling in from the desert. The sun hung directly overhead, a white-hot coin pressed into the blue velvet of the sky. It was noon in Rattlesnake Gulch, the hour when shadows vanished and sins were laid bare. The heat was a physical weight, pressing down on the 300 souls gathered in the town square. They stood in a semicircle, sweating in their Sunday best, their eyes fixed on the wooden platform erected in front of the land office. Mayor Luther Kane stood at the lectern, wiping his forehead with a linen handkerchief that was already damp. Beside him stood Reverend Phelps, clutching a Bible as if it were a weapon, and Silas Grady, who looked like a coiled rattlesnake in a silk suit. "We gather here not in anger, but in sorrow," Kane bellowed, his voice booming across the silent crowd. "We gather to exercise for cancer. Marin Sinclair has not only abandoned her race and her station, but she has conspired with savages to sabotage the very industry that feeds our children." Silas Grady stepped forward, holding up a charred piece of wood. It was a prop, theatrical and fake. "This was found near the ventilation shaft." Grady lied smoothly. "Apache markings, burn marks. She weakened the supporters deliberately. She killed Henderson to spite me. And now, she rides with the Stonehawk, plotting to bring this town to its knees." A murmur of fear rippled through the crowd. "Mrs." Gable gasped, clutching her husband's arm. The narrative was taking hold. Fear was a potent intoxication, and Kane was pouring it by the gallon. "Therefore," Kane continued, gesturing to a sign painter who was finishing a placard, "we declare Marin Sinclair an outlaw. A bounty of $500 is placed on her head. And tonight, at sundown, her property, which has become a den of treason, will be razed to the ground." "Burn it!" a man shouted from the back. The mob mentality was sparking, like dry tinder waiting for a match. "Let it be known," Reverend Phelps added, his voice trembling with a righteous fury. that any who ate her are enemies of God in Rattlesnake Gulch. Is the truth an enemy of God, Reverend? The voice was not loud, but it cut through the humid air like a diamond cutter through glass. The crowd turned as one. At the far end of the main street, emerging from the shimmering heat haze, rode a line of 5 horses. In the center was Chief Taza, upright and regal, his rifle resting easily across his saddle. And beside him, sitting tall on a roan mare, was Marin Sinclair. She wore the same dust-stained trousers and shirt she had fled in. The bandage on her forehead was stark white against her sun-browned skin. But it was her eyes that stopped the breath in the crowd's throat. They were not the eyes of a shamed widow. They were the eyes of a judge. "She has returned!" a woman screamed. "Regulators!" Silas Grady shouted, his composure cracking. "Stop them!" 5 men in long dusters stepped out from the shadows of the saloon porch, their hands hovering over their holstered Colts. These were the hired guns. The Pinkerton rejects Grady had brought in on the morning train. "Hold your fire," Deputy Cole shouted. Stepping off the boardwalk, he looked pale, his eyes darting between the mayor and Marin. "There are women and children here. Grady." Marin did not stop. She rode straight toward the platform, flanking the crowd, forcing the regulators to hold back or risk shooting the townspeople. Taza rode beside her, his presence a dark shield. They halted 10 yards from the mayor. Marin swung down from her saddle. Her boots hit the dust with a heavy, deliberate thud. She did not run. She did not hide. She walked to the center of the open space, the very spot where she had been humiliated days before. "You speak of sabotage, Silas," Marin said, her voice steady. She reached into her saddlebag and pulled out a heavy object. It was not a weapon. It was a block of wood, dark and spongy. She threw it onto the platform. It landed with a wet thud at Kane's feet. "That is the timber from Shaft 4, Marin announced. "It is not charred. It is rotten. It is sapwood, untreaded and green. Poke it. Mayor, your finger will go right through." Kane stared at the wood. He did not move. "Lies," Grady shrieked. She planted it. "And this?" Marin pulled the crumpled paper from her belt. She held it high. "The supply ledger, dated March 1878. Signed by you, Silas. 500 feet of grade C timber, billed to the investors as grade A oak." She turned to the crowd, walking along the line of faces she knew. She saw the baker. She saw the blacksmith. "He stole the difference," Marin said, looking the blacksmith in the eye. "He bought wood that he knew would snap. He bet Henderson's life against $1,000 of profit, and he won." "That ledger is stolen property," Kane roared. "Deputy, arrest her." "I have a witness," Marin interrupted. She turned back to the horses. "Eli." The 12-year-old boy slid down from behind Nantan. He looked small and terrified, but he walked to Marin's side. He looked at the crowd, then at his mother, who was standing near the mercantile, weeping. I saw the books," Eli stammered, his voice cracking. "I saw Mr. Grady change the numbers, and I heard him tell the foreman to ignore the water in the east vein." "The boy is confused," Reverend Phelps yelled. "Corrupted by the savage." Taza stepped forward then. He did not shout. He simply let the butt of his rifle hit the ground with a solid crack. The sound silenced the Reverend instantly. Taza looked at the mayor. He looked at the regulators. "You dig deep," Taza said, his voice rolling like distant thunder. "You poison the water that flows to my people and to your wells. You steal the bones of the mountain." He looked at the crowd. "When you break the earth answers." It was a condemnation that struck deeper than any law. It was a primal truth that every miner felt in their bones. Silas Grady saw the shift. He saw the doubt in the eyes of the townspeople. He saw his empire of lies crumbling under the weight of a piece of rotten wood and a boy's confession. "Kill them!" Grady screamed at the regulators. $5,000 to the man who drops the witch." The lead regulator, a man with a scar across his nose, did not hesitate. He drew and fired. The bullet kicked up dirt inches from Marin's boot. "Down!" Taza roared, shoving Marin behind a water trough. Pandemonium erupted. The crowd screamed and scattered, diving for cover behind wagons and barrels. The square turned into a killing zone. The Apache warriors returned fire, their Winchesters cracking sharply. They were disciplined, aiming for the gunmen, trying to keep the civilians safe, but the regulators did not care. They sprayed lead indiscriminately, shattering windows and splintering wood. Marin grabbed Eli, pulling him down into the dirt behind the trough. "Stay low." Bullets hammered the wood above her head, sending splinters raining down. She looked at the mine entrance, 50 yards up the slope behind the town hall. It was the only way out. If they stayed here, pinned down, they would be flanked and slaughtered. "Taza!" Marin yelled over the roar of the gunfight. "At the ventilation tunnel." Taza understood instantly. He signaled Nantan and the others to lay down suppressing fire. "Run!" Taza commanded. Marin grabbed Eli's hand. They sprinted. Dust puffed around their feet as bullets chased them. They scrambled up the scree slope toward the wooden frame of the ventilation adit. It was a narrow service entrance, rarely used, leading into the upper levels of the mine. They dove into the darkness of the tunnel just as a volley of shots chewed up the frame entrance. "They are coming!" Eli cried. Looking back, Marin could see the regulators advancing up the slope. Using the panic of the crowd as cover, Silas Grady was with them, a pistol in his hand, his face twisted in a mask of murderous rage. Marin looked around the tunnel. It was lined with crates of supplies lanterns, rope, and a small box marked "Danger," black powder. She grabbed the box. It was a small charge, used for clearing rock falls, not for deep blasting, but it would be enough. "Taza, get them back," Marin ordered, pointing deeper into the tunnel. She jammed the small crate of powder into the timber bracing of the entrance. She tore a strip of cloth from her shirt, stuffed it into the hole of the crate, and poured a trail of loose powder onto the floor. "Marin, no!" Taza shouted, realizing what she was doing. "It will collapse. That is the point," Marin yelled back. She struck a match on the rock wall. She dropped the match on the powder trail. The flame hissed and raced toward the crate. Marin turned and ran, diving behind a pile of rock further down the tunnel just as the world turned white. Boom! The explosion was not massive, but in the confined space, it was deafening. The concussion wave knocked the breath out of her. A cloud of choking dust billowed out, filling the air. The timber supports at the mouth of the tunnel gave way. With a groan of surrendering earth, the entrance collapsed, sending tons of rock and dirt cascading down, sealing the opening. Outside, on the slope, the regulators were thrown back by the blast of air and debris. They scrambled away, coughing, covered in dust. Silence followed the roar. Marin lay in the dark, her ears ringing. She coughed, waving her hand to clear the dust. The beam of a flashlight cut through the gloom. Taza was there, pulling her up. "Are you whole?" he asked urgently, his hands checking her arms. "I am whole," Marin rasped. "Is Eli safe?" "He is with Nantan." "The entrance is sealed," Marin said, pointing to the wall of rubble. "They cannot get in, and we have another way out. The main shaft lift." "You trapped us inside?" Taza asked. "No," Marin said, her mind working with the cold precision of a foreman. "I trapped them outside. With the truth." She led them deeper into the mine, navigating the labyrinthine tunnels she knew by heart. They circled back toward the main vertical shaft, the cage that led to the surface platform right behind the mayor's podium. Outside, the dust was settling. Silas Grady stood up, brushing dirt from his suit. He looked at the collapsed tunnel entrance and laughed. A jagged, manic sound. "Buried!" Grady shouted to the terrified townspeople peeking out from cover. "God has spoken! The witch brought the mountain down on herself!" Mayor Kane crawled out from under the podium. "Justice is done," he declared, though his voice shook. "The threat has ended." "Is it?" The voice came from behind them. The crowd gasped. The large wheel of the main mine lift was turning. The cage rattled and rose from the depths, clanking against the iron guides. It rose into the sunlight, and there, standing behind the mesh gate, were Marin, Taza, and Eli. They were covered in fresh dust, ghost-like, but very much alive. Marin threw the gate open. She stepped onto the platform, standing 10 feet above Grady and Kane. "You cannot bury the truth, Silas," Marin said. Her voice was amplified by the acoustics of the shaft behind her. "You just dig it up." Silas Grady stared at her as if she were a revenant. He raised his pistol, his hand shaking. "Die, just die." Drop it, Silas." The command came from the side. Deputy Cole stood there. He had his service revolver drawn, and for the first time in his life, it was pointed steady and true at the richest man in town. "Cole," Grady snarled. "I own you." "You rented me," Cole corrected, his jaw set. "But you did not buy my soul." "The boy, Silas, you fired on the boy." Cole cocked the hammer. "Put the gun down." Grady looked at the regulators. They were dusting themselves off, looking at the deputy, then at the Apache warriors who had taken up firing positions on the high roofs during the confusion. The mercenaries did the math. They were not getting paid enough for this. They slowly holstered their weapons and backed away. Grady was alone. He looked at the crowd. He saw no support. He saw only anger. The explosion had shaken the ground under their feet, reminding every miner of the terror of the collapse. They looked at the rotten wood still lying on the podium. They connected the dots. Grady's gun clattered to the dirt. 2 miners surged forward and grabbed him, pinning his arms behind his back. Mayor Kane tried to salvage the moment. He smoothed his vest, stepping toward Marin. "Mrs. Sinclair, perhaps there has been a misunderstanding. If Mr. Grady has indeed cut corners." "Stop," Marin said. She walked down the stairs from the platform, Taza at her side. She walked straight up to Luther Kane. The mayor, a man who had terrified her for 2 years, suddenly looked small. He looked like a man made of paper. "You want to arrest me?" "Mayor," Marin asked softly. Kane licked his lips. "Marin, we must maintain order. The town is not the problem," Marin said. She looked around at the faces of her neighbors. They were lowering their eyes, ashamed. She turned back to Kane. The anger in her chest had cooled into something hard and permanent, like obsidian. "You are not a bad man because you want order, Luther," Marin said. Her voice was not loud, but in the silence of the square, every syllable was a hammer blow. "You are bad because you need someone to stone." Kane flinched as if she had slapped him. "You need a witch so you do not have to look at your own sins," Marin continued. "You need a savage so you do not have to admit you are stealing the land. You need a victim to feel powerful." She gestured to the rotten wood, to the terrified Eli, to the poisoned ledger. "Well, look at us," Marin said. "We are not victims today." She turned to Taza. He was watching her with a fierce pride burning in his dark eyes. He did not need to speak. His presence was the endorsement that shattered Kane's authority. "Deputy," Marin said, not looking back at the mayor. "Take Mr. Grady into custody and lock the ledger in the safe. The circuit judge comes on Tuesday." "Yes, ma'am," Cole said. Marin looked at the crowd. "Go home," she told them. "The show is over." She did not wait for applause. She did not wait for apologies. She turned and walked toward the livery stable, Taza falling in step beside her. Behind them, the town of Rattlesnake Gulch stood in stunned silence, the dust of the explosion settling on their shoulders, the weight of the truth settling on their hearts. The sun was still high, but the world had changed. The woman they had shamed had just saved them, and the silence she left behind was louder than any shout. The dust in the town square of Rattlesnake Gulch did not settle quickly. It hung in the air, a haze of red particulate that tasted of copper and gunpowder, filtering the afternoon sun into a strange, bruised amber. Silas Grady was in irons, his wrists bound with the same heavy steel cuffs he had often threatened his workers with. Deputy Cole, looking older than his 25 years, marched the sputtering mine owner toward the small jailhouse. "This is a mistake," Grady was screaming, his voice cracking with desperation. "I have investors in San Francisco. I have friends in the territorial capital. You cannot lock up capital." "Cole," You cannot arrest progress. I am not arresting progress. Mr. Grady, Cole said, shoving him through the door. I am arresting a man who tried to murder a woman and a child to save a few dollars on timber. But as the heavy iron door clanged shut, Marin Sinclair knew the war was not over. She stood near the livery stable, Taza at her side, watching the crowd. The immediate threat of gunfire had passed, but the town was not cheering. They were murmuring. Mayor Luther Kane had not been arrested. He stood on the steps of the town hall, adjusting his vest, his face pale but his eyes hard. He was a politician, and politicians knew how to survive storms that drowned lesser men. He was already talking to Mrs. Gable and the banker, gesturing frantically, distancing himself from Grady. He will spin this, Marin said quietly, wiping the grit from her cheek. By tomorrow, he will say he was deceived by Grady too. He will say he is the victim. He is a snake without fangs. Taza replied, his gaze fixed on Kane. But he still has venom in the sack. Marin felt the weight of the eyes on her. The miners' men she had worked beside, men who had spat at her 3 days ago, were looking at her now with a confusing mix of shame and lingering resentment. She had saved them from the poison. Yes, she had exposed the fraud, but she was still a woman in trousers standing next to an Apache chief. She had shattered their worldview, and people rarely forgave the hammer that broke the glass. You should go, Marin said to Taza. The soldiers from the fort will hear about the shooting. They will come. I do not leave my allies on the battlefield, Taza said. We have business to finish. They moved to the Rusty Spur Saloon. It was the only place that felt like neutral ground. Maeve O'Rourke met them at the swinging doors, a double-barreled shotgun still cradled in her arm. Get inside, Maeve ordered, her voice rough with relief. Before someone decides to be a hero and take a pot shot. The saloon was empty, save for a few regulars who were too drunk or too old to care about riots. Maeve locked the doors and flipped the sign to closed. You did it, Maeve said, looking at Marin. I never thought I would see the day Silas Grady wore iron. It is not done, Marin said. Sinking into a chair, her legs suddenly felt like water. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a crushing exhaustion. The mine is closed. The men are out of work. Kane is still mayor, and half the town still thinks I am a witch. Let them think. Maeve poured 3 glasses of whiskey. Better a witch than a martyr. Taza did not sit. He stood by the window, watching the street through the slats of the blinds. The town is frightened. Frightened men look for a new master. Kane will try to be that master again. I have to leave, Marin said, staring at the amber liquid in her glass. I cannot stay here. Maeve, they will never let me work that mine again. They will burn the house the moment you look away. And where? Taza turned from the window. To the reservation, to starve on government rations, or to the mountains, to be hunted like a wolf. I do not know, Marin whispered. But I cannot go back to being the dirt witch. I cannot go back to the silence. Then change the noise, Taza said. He walked over to the table. He placed his hands on the wood, leaning down to look her in the eye. We made a treaty, Taza said. Not with the government, with the town, with the mine. A treaty, Marin asked. The poison stops. Taza listed the terms. The dumping in the spirit wash ends. The timber is inspected by us by you. And in exchange, my people do not raid the supply wagons. We trade, we sell meat and blankets. We exist side by side. Kane will never agree to that, Marin said. Kane has no leverage. Taza said, Grady is gone. The investors will want the silver flowing. If the only way to get the silver is peace with the Apache and safety for the workers, they will choose the silver. But they need a manager they can trust, someone who knows the rock. Marin stared at him. You want me to run the mine? I want you to own your place in it, Taza corrected. You saved it. It belongs to you more than it ever belonged to Grady. The audacity of it took her breath away. A woman running the Rattlesnake Gulch mine. It was impossible. It was insane. And yet, looking at Taza, she saw no doubt. Why? Marin asked, her voice trembling. Why do you fight for me? Taza, is it just to beat Kane? Am I just a symbol to you, the white woman who turned against her own? It was the question that had haunted her since the canyon. Was she just a convenient weapon in his war against the encroachment? The room went quiet. Maeve, sensing the shift, quietly picked up a rag and began polishing the far end of the bar, making herself invisible. Taza looked at Marin. The hardness in his face softened, revealing the man beneath the legend of the stone hawk. I have many symbols, Taza said quietly. I have the hawk feather. I have the lightning marks on my horse. I do not need another symbol. He reached out, his hand hovering near hers on the table, but not touching. I saw you in the dark, Taza said. When the earth broke, you did not run for the light. You went deeper to find the boy. You held the roof up with your will. He paused, searching for the English words to match his thought. I did not choose you because you are strange, he said. I chose you because you are iron, and because I saw you lonely. A chief knows loneliness. It is the price of holding up the sky for others. Marin felt tears prick her eyes. Hot and sudden, he saw it. He saw the crushing weight of the responsibility she carried for Toby, for the land, for her own survival. I am tired of being iron, Marin whispered. Then be flesh, Taza said. Tonight, be flesh. Maeve cleared her throat softly. There is a room in the back, clean sheets, hot water on the stove. No one will disturb you. The deputy is watching the alley. Marin looked at Maeve, then at Taza. The sun was setting outside, casting long shadows across the floor. The fight for the town would start again at sunrise, but for the next few hours, the war was paused. Go, Maeve said gently. Wash the dust off, honey. The room behind the saloon was small but clean. It smelled of lavender soap and dried cedar. A large copper tub sat in the center, filled with steaming water that Maeve had prepared. Marin locked the door. She stood for a long time, just breathing. She unbuckled her gun belt and laid it on the chair. She took off the heavy boots, the trousers stiff with dirt, the shirt stained with sweat and black powder. She stepped into the water. It was hot, stinging her scrapes, but it felt like absolution. She scrubbed the mine from her skin. She washed her hair, the red water swirling away. When she was clean, wrapped in a simple cotton robe Maeve had left, there was a soft knock at the door. It is Taza. The voice was low. Marin opened the door. He had washed as well, likely at the pump in the yard. The war paint was gone. The dust was gone. He wore clean buckskins, and his hair was loose, falling around his shoulders like a dark curtain. He stepped inside, closing the door against the noise of the world. The room felt suddenly very small, charged with an electricity that made the air hum. Marin walked to the small table where a single oil lamp burned, casting a golden glow against the walls. Taza watched her. He did not move to grab her. He stood with the patience of a hunter, or perhaps a pilgrim. The dust is gone, he observed, looking at her face, fresh and scrubbed. The dust comes back, Marin said, turning to face him. It always comes back, then we wash it off again. Taza said. He took a step closer. The space between them evaporated. Marin looked up at him. She saw the scar on his jawline, the deep brown of his irises, the pulse beating steadily in his neck. Marin, he said her name like a prayer. I asked you in the canyon if you wanted me to stop. I ask you again. This is not a treaty. This is not for the town. He was giving her the power. He was letting her define the moment. Marin reached out and took his hand. It was large, warm, and scarred a map of his own battles. She brought it to her cheek, leaning into his palm. Do not stop, she whispered. She saw his eyes darken, the restraint cracking. He lowered his head. Marin rose on her tiptoes and met him. The kiss was not tentative. I was hungry. It was the collision of two people who had been starving for touch, for softness, for a place to rest. Taza groaned low in his throat, his arms coming around her, pulling her flush against him. He felt solid, unmovable, a mountain she could finally lean against. Marin tangled her fingers in his hair, pulling him closer. The smell of him soap and skin and man filled her senses. He lifted her easily, as if she weighed nothing. Marin wrapped her legs around his waist, burying her face in the crook of his neck. He carried her to the narrow bed, lowering her onto the quilt with a surprising gentleness. He hovered over her, bracing his weight on his elbows, framing her face with his hands. He looked at her with an intensity that stripped her bare more than the removal of clothes ever could. He traced the line of her jaw with his thumb. "I see you," he whispered. "I see you," Marin replied. He kissed her again, slower this time, a deep, exploring rhythm that spoke of promises made in the dark. Marin arched into him, her hands moving over the muscles of his back, feeling the tension leaving him, feeling the barrier between two worlds dissolving into the simple, ancient language of skin on skin. The golden light of the lamp flickered, casting their shadows on the wall as one single shape. The world outside Cain, the mine, the hatred faded into a distant hum, irrelevant and small. There was only this room, this heat, and this man. The scene faded to black, leaving only the sound of their breathing and the soft hiss of the oil lamp. Morning did not bring a miracle. It brought the harsh, uncompromising sun of the Arizona Territory. Marin woke up with the light hitting her face. For a moment, she was disoriented. She was not in her shack. She was not in the mine. She was in a bed that smelled of cedar. She turned. The other side of the bed was empty, but the pillow was indented. She sat up, clutching the sheet. "Has he gone?" The door opened and Taza stepped in. He had been outside, checking the perimeter. He was fully dressed, his knife back at his belt. The warrior was back, but when he looked at her, the softness returned to his eyes. "The town is waking up," Taza said. "There are patrols on the road. The army has not come yet, but they will." Marin nodded, the reality of the day crashing down on her. "We have to move." She dressed quickly. When she strapped the gun belt around her waist, it felt different. It felt less like a burden and more like a tool. They walked out into the main room of the saloon. Maeve was already there, brewing a pot of coffee that smelled like heaven and tar. The saloon was not empty. It was full. Miners were sitting at the tables, not drinking, but talking. When Marin walked in, the conversation died. She braced herself for the insults. "Morning, Marin," a voice said. It was the blacksmith, a man who had jeered at her yesterday. He did not look her in the eye, but he nodded. "Morning, Tom," Marin replied, keeping her voice steady. "We heard," the blacksmith said, fiddling with his hat. "About the timber, about Henderson. Maeve told us. We didn't know." "You didn't ask," Marin said. "She didn't let them off the hook, but she didn't condemn them either." "Is it true?" another miner asked. "About the poison in the water. My girl, she has been sick for a month." "It is true," Taza said, his voice filling the room. "The East Vein is a sewer. If you dig there, you will kill your children." The miners looked at each other. The fear of the Apache was being replaced by the fear of the poison. A common enemy makes for strange bedfellows. "What do we do?" a young miner asked. "Grady is in jail. The mine is shut. We don't eat if we don't dig." Marin stepped forward. She placed her hands on the back of a chair. "We dig," Marin said. "But we dig right. We shore up Shaft 4 with oak. We seal the East Vein. And we tell the investors that if they want silver, they deal with us. No more shortcuts. No more dying for $2 a day." "And Cain?" the blacksmith asked. "He says you are an outlaw." "Cain is a man who bets on the winning horse," Maeve said from behind the bar, sliding a coffee cup to Marin. "You boys just have to show him which horse is winning." At that moment, the door swung open. Deputy Cole walked in. He looked exhausted. "I sent the telegram," Cole announced, taking off his hat. "To the territorial marshal in Tucson. I sent the ledger pages too, on the morning stage. The evidence is out of town." "And Grady?" Marin asked. "Singing like a bird," Cole said with a grim smile. "He is blaming everyone but himself. Mostly Cain." "Good," Marin said. "Let them eat each other." She finished her coffee and looked at Taza. "I have to go to the mine. I have to inspect the ventilation seals before we can even think about sending men down." "I will ride with you," Taza said. "And us." The blacksmith stood up. "We will walk with you, just in case the mayor tries anything." "I reckon I will come too," another miner said. It wasn't a parade, and it wasn't a celebration. It was a group of grim-faced men and one woman, walking out of the saloon into the bright street. People watched them from the windows. Mayor Kane watched from his office, his curtains drawn. He saw the miners surrounding Marin and the Apache chief. He saw the deputy walking point, and he realized, with the sinking sensation of a man whose political career was dying, that the power had shifted. He couldn't arrest a mob, not when the mob knew the truth. They reached the mine entrance. The gate was hanging open. The sign Kane had threatened to hang was nowhere to be seen. Marin stopped at the entrance. She looked at the dark maw of the earth. For 2 years, this hole had been her prison. It had been the place where she hid her shame. She unhooked her brass lamp from her belt. She struck a match on the sole of her boot and lit the wick. The flame flared up, bright and steady in the daylight. She did not clip it to her helmet to go down. She set the lamp on a flat rock right at the entrance, a beacon visible to anyone coming up the road. "What is that for?" Eli asked, appearing at her elbow. The boy had been waiting there, guarding the gate with a stick. "It is a signal," Marin said, resting her hand on Eli's shoulder. "It means the mine is open, but it also means we are watching. The light stays on, above ground and below." She looked at Taza. He was standing a few feet away, watching the horizon where his own people waited. "You have your treaty," Marin said softly to him. "The men will not fight you, and the water will be clean." "And you?" Taza asked. "Do you stay?" Marin looked at the town below, then at the mine, and finally at the man who had seen her when she was invisible. "I stay," Marin said. "Someone has to keep the timber strong." Taza nodded. He did not smile, but his eyes were warm. "Then I will be near. The mountains are not so far." He mounted his horse. He did not look back as he rode toward the ridge. But Marin knew he would be there. She turned back to the miners. "All right," Marin said, her voice ringing with authority. "Grab the timber. We have a lot of work to do." The falling action had begun. Not with a dramatic battle, but with the slow, steady work of rebuilding. The town was still divided. The hatred would not vanish overnight. But as Marin Sinclair stood at the mouth of the mine, the sun on her face and the lamp burning beside her, she knew the darkness no longer owned her. She had walked through the fire, and she had come out the other side not as a victim, and not as a man, but as herself. The autumn winds had come early to the Arizona territory, sweeping down from the Dragoon Mountains to scour the valley floor. But this year, the wind did not taste of chemical ash and bitter regret. It smelled of sage, cooling earth, and the clean, sharp scent of pine timber. It was October, 1878. 6 months had passed since the explosion that sealed the ventilation shaft and opened the eyes of Rattlesnake Gulch. Marin Sinclair stood at the main intake of Shaft 4. She was not wearing a silk dress, nor was she sitting in the plush leather chair that Silas Grady had once occupied in the main office. She wore a fresh pair of denim trousers, a flannel shirt buttoned to the collar, and her boots were caked with the same gray mud that coated every man on the shift. "Hold the line there," Marin called out, her voice cutting through the noise of the steam winch. "That cable looks frayed on the second braid. Swap it out before you send the cage down." A burly miner, a man who had once spat on the ground she walked on, nodded respectfully. "Yes, boss, we will get the spare." She was not the owner. The mine was technically held in a trust by the San Francisco investors, while Grady awaited trial in the territorial prison. But she was the manager. The investors, terrifyingly pragmatic men, had looked at the production numbers since Marin took over the daily operations. They saw that accidents had dropped to 0, They saw that the quality of the silver ore had improved because the men were not afraid to work the deep veins. They did not care that she was a woman. They cared that she was profitable. Maren wiped her hands on a rag. The work was still hard. Her back still ached at the end of the day, and the coal dust still found its way into the creases of her skin. She was not a fairy tale princess who had been rescued. She was a worker who had won the right to labor with dignity. She walked out of the mine entrance and looked down toward the creek. 3 months ago, the water had been a sluggish, oily brown. Today, it ran clear. It had taken weeks of back-breaking labor to dredge the toxic sludge from the spirit wash. Taza had sent his warriors to help, working side by side with the miners. It was a strange sight at first, Apache and white man, shoveling mud together in the blistering heat. There were no songs, no brotherly embraces, just the silent, shared understanding that poison did not care about the color of a man's skin. Now, the willows along the bank were turning a vibrant yellow, drinking deep of the clean water. The deer had returned to the lower valley. The earth was answering the care they had shown it. Maren walked down the slope toward the town. Rattlesnake Gulch looked different. The fear that had hung over the streets like a shroud was gone. The land office had a new sign. Mayor Kane was gone. He had not been arrested, but he had been unseated in a special election held in August. The townspeople, tired of the drama and the corruption, had voted for Tom, the blacksmith. He was a quiet man who knew the value of hard iron and honest words. Kane still lived in his big house on the hill, but he was a ghost, invited to no dinners, consulted on no decisions. Maren passed the church. The doors were open, but the pews were mostly empty. Reverend Phelps had been exposed by Deputy Cole's investigation. It turned out the charitable donations from Silas Grady had gone straight into the Reverend's personal account in Tucson. The congregation, pious as they were, could not stomach a shepherd who sheared the sheep for the wolves. Phelps preached to the dust motes now, a hollow voice in a hollow room. But the biggest change was happening at the edge of town, near the livery stable. It was trade day. Once a month, under the terms of the agreement Taza and Maren had brokered, the Apache band came down from the mountains. They set up blankets displaying woven baskets, deer hides, and dried meat. The townspeople brought flour, coffee, and bolts of cloth. It was not a festival. There was no music. It was a business arrangement, but it was peaceful. Maren saw Mrs. Gable, the banker's wife, haggling with an Apache woman over a turquoise necklace. They did not speak the same language, but they spoke the universal language of commerce, fingers held up, heads shaken, smiles exchanged. Standing watch over the market was Deputy Cole. He leaned against a post, whittling a stick. He wasn't gripping his gun. He was just watching, and standing opposite him, near the corral, was Nantan. The warrior who had once wanted to put a knife in Maren's ribs gave a small nod to the deputy. It was a truce built on iron-hard respect. Maren felt a presence beside her before she saw him. "The corn is good this year," Taza said. She turned. The chief stood there, dressed in a clean cotton shirt and buckskin trousers. He did not look like a savage invader. He looked like a neighbor. "The water helped," Maren said. "Toby says the garden at the homestead has finally produced pumpkins." "Toby learns fast," Taza said. "He tracks well for a boy with a limp." Taza had been spending time at the homestead. He had taught Toby how to read the signs of the weather, how to carve wood, and how to find pride in a body that was broken but still useful. "He does not feel broken anymore," Maren said softly. "That is what you are doing." "He found his own strength," Taza corrected. "I just showed him where to look." He looked at Maren. The sun caught the silver streak in her hair, a premature mark of the stress she had endured. But to him, it looked like a vein of precious metal. "The council meets tonight," Taza said. "My family will be there. Etza will be there." Maren felt a flutter in her chest. This was not a business meeting. "I will be there," she said, that evening, under a sky vast and thick with stars. A fire burned in the center of the Apache high camp. It was not a huge bonfire for a war dance, but a steady, warm hearth fire. There was no priest. There was no mayor. There was no white lace dress. Marin wore her best Sunday skirt, a simple blue calico, and a clean white shirt. Taza wore a ceremonial vest beaded with the patterns of the storm and the mountain. They did not need a legal paper from the territory. The laws of the Arizona Territory had tried to destroy them both. They answered to an older law. They stood before the fire. Etza, the ancient medicine woman, sat on a buffalo robe, her milky eyes fixed on a point beyond the flames. Taza took Marin's hands. His palms were warm and rough. "I promise no easy life," Taza said, his voice low and grave in the silence of the canyon. "The wind will still blow cold. The snow will still fall. Men will still hate what they do not understand." "I do not ask for easy," Marin replied, her voice steady. "I ask for the truth." "Then I will give you my truth," Taza said. "I will stand between you and the dark. I will hold the roof when the earth shakes. You are the woman I want. You are the woman I choose. And I choose you," Marin said. "I chose the storm. I chose the mountain. I will not hide in the town while you ride the ridge. Where you go, I am there." Etza threw a handful of sage onto the fire. The smoke rose, white and fragrant, twisting into the night sky. It was the only blessing they needed. They sat down by the fire, side by side. Taza cut a piece of cooked venison and handed it to her. She ate. It was a simple communion. Flesh and blood, survival and shared life. Later, as the fire died down to glowing embers, Marin leaned her head against Taza's shoulder. His arm came around her, heavy and protective. They watched the sparks drift upward to join the stars. They were two outcasts, a widow shamed by her own people, and a chief fighting a losing war against time. But here, in the circle of this firelight, they were the center of the world. The next morning, life resumed its demands. There was no honeymoon. There was more to move. Marin rode back to the mine early. She found Eli waiting for her at the gate. The boy was taller now, filling out the frame that had been so scrawny 6 months ago. He was working as a sorter, separating the high-grade ore from the slag. "Morning, boss," Eli said, tipping his cap. "Morning, Eli," Marin said, dismounting. She walked over to the supply shed and unlocked it. She reached onto the top shelf and pulled down a small object. It was a brass mine lamp, not her old battered one, but a new one, polished and filled with fresh oil. She walked back to Eli. "I have something for you," she said, holding it out. Eli looked at the lamp, then at her. "For me, but I work at the sorting table. I do not go down in the dark." "You will," Marin said. "You have an eye for the rock, Eli. You see the veins better than men twice your age. Next week, I want you to start shadowing the foreman on the Level 2 inspection." Eli's eyes widened. "Level 2, that is real mining." "It is," Marin agreed. She pressed the lamp into his hands. "Take it," she said. "But remember what this is." Eli looked at the brass reflection. "It is a lamp, ma'am." "No," Marin said, her voice serious. "It is my responsibility. When you are down there, this light is the only thing that keeps you and the men beside you alive. If you let it go out, you are blind. If you let it get dirty, it dims." She looked up at the mountain, then back at the boy who had risked his life to bring her the ledger. "Light is not something people give you." "Eli?" Marin said, "It is not something the mayor gives you, or the person, or me. It is something you keep. You have to trim the wick yourself. You have to carry the oil. Do you understand?" Eli nodded slowly, his fingers tightening around the handle. "I keep the light. You keep the light," Marin repeated. "And you tell the truth about what you see in the dark. That is the job." "Yes, ma'am," Eli whispered. He looked at the lamp with a new reverence. He wasn't just a boy with a job anymore. He was a keeper of the flame. Marin turned. Taza was waiting for her by the horses. He had come down to escort her to the weekly meeting with the investor's representative. She walked toward him. He watched her approach. He did not look at her with the possessive gaze of a savior, nor the condescending gaze of a master. He looked at her as a man looks at the horizon, something vast, beautiful, and completely its own. He held out a hand. She took it, swinging up into her own saddle. They turned their horses toward the road that led through the town. They rode down the main street of Rattlesnake Gulch. The baker waved. The blacksmith nodded. Even Mrs. Gable, standing on the boardwalk, offered a tentative, polite smile. Marin did not need their smiles, but she accepted them. They were the truce flags of a society that was learning, slowly and painfully. That difference did not mean danger. "They look at you differently now," Taza noted. "They look at me and see the silver," Marin said dryly. "No," Taza said. "They look at you and see the one who stayed." They passed the spot where the whipping post had once stood, now dismantled for firewood. They passed the jail where Silas Grady sat, waiting for the circuit judge. They passed the saloon where Maeve was sweeping the porch, who raised her broom in a silent salute. They rode out past the last buildings, where the road turned into the open desert. The sun was climbing high, bleaching the red earth to a dazzling white. The heat waves shimmered off the ground, turning the distance into a liquid mirage. The future was not safe. The price of silver could drop. The army could return with new orders. The rains could fail. The Arizona Territory was a land that promised nothing but struggle. But as Marin Sinclair rode beside Stonehawk, the dust rising around them like a golden mist, she felt a profound sense of peace. She was no longer fighting for a place to stand. She had built her own ground. She touched the turquoise stone that still hung around her neck, warm against her skin. She touched the handle of the revolver at her hip, and she looked at the man beside her. They were two survivors, two scars on the face of the desert, but the scars were tough. Scars were proof of healing. Taza looked over at her and smiled, a rare, true expression that crinkled the corners of his dark eyes. "We ride?" he asked. "We ride," Marin answered. They kicked their horses into a gallop, leaving the town and the mine behind, riding toward the vast, open country where the sky met the earth. They were not riding into the sunset of a storybook ending. They were riding into the bright, blinding, beautiful noon of a life they had chosen for themselves. A life where dignity was not asked for, but taken. A life where love was not a soft thing, but a hard, enduring truth, forged in the dark and brought, finally, into the light. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed the journey of Marin and Taza in the Wild West. Please leave a comment below and tell us where you are listening from. We would love to connect with you and hear your thoughts on the ending. If you enjoyed this tale, please consider subscribing to my channel, Wild West Tales. Like this video, and hit the hype button to help this story reach more people. Your support helps us keep the campfire burning. Thank you.